I could talk about women in the original series forever. Forever. I had a lot of fun making my videos about women in the original series, and I really appreciate everybody who tuned in. In this video, I want to talk in more detail about a couple more women, as requested by y'all. Specifically, I want to talk about the most requested, the most well-known, the best bitches on the Starship Enterprise, Lieutenant Uhura and Nurse Chapel. Uhura and Chapel do really deserve more than just a quick image with some text on it. They have the most characterization and screen time of any women in the original series. I do think, as indicated in my original Women in TOS video, that they are undervalued and sidelined and just generally put in unobtrusively feminine positions that mean they still fit really cleanly into Karen Blair's summary of women in Star Trek, which says that any woman in Star Trek is attached to a man, sexualized and or disposable. And I also didn't think that further analysis of these two really added a whole lot to my original argument in that Women in TOS video. But all that being said, they are really important and really cool, and their impact really can't be denied.
Lieutenant Uhura in particular deserves a great deal of credit for the intersectional boundaries broken by her character as a black woman. Her character had a place of greater prominence than was often seen on television at the time, and Plato's Stepchildren is generally cited as showing the first interracial kiss on television. Martin Luther King Jr. met with Nichelle Nichols and spoke to the cultural import of Uhura. There is great value in marginalized groups being able to see themselves reflected positively in popular media. Uhura has inspired so many, and Nichelle Nichols has continued to inspire outside of the small screen, being particularly well known for the recruitment work she did with NASA. Lieutenant Uhura as a symbol and Nichelle Nichols as a real-life person are hugely important and influential.
However, this doesn't mean she's not part of the original series trend of undervaluing and sexualizing women.
For instance, the role of communications officer is important on principle. Again, all these women are really cool as individuals. But in terms of plot relevance and narrative impact, Uhura doesn't have much to do. She is, in most episodes, essentially very important and beloved set dressing, God love her. I certainly appreciate the courage she shows in many of the episodes where she joins landing parties or is otherwise more involved in the story, but these episodes also generally feature men lusting after her or her entertaining for the male gaze. Her wonderful songs are both love songs, after all, sung to add flavor to a young man's story.
And then there's the fan dance in Star Trek V, but that's not really the chunk of canon I'm talking about right now.
Considering the world the original series was produced in, it's hard not to see her role on the bridge as that of a secretary, but in space. This is, in and of itself, a functionally very important role, both on the bridge and in real life, but it has not traditionally been highly valued and is often thought of as a sort of office grunt work.
So, I mean no insult to Uhura. She's fabulous and so influential, but her character is still handled in much the same way as all the other women in Star Trek, and those characterization patterns have some flaws. Nurse Chapel veers even closer to the sexualized and undervalued trends in the one-off female characters.
She's cast in the medical role most associated with women, so, similar to Uhura, she is in a role that is both objectively important and culturally perceived as a subordinate position. Though she is, quote, made an MD, unquote, by the time the motion picture rolls around, I'd say a nurse who makes occasional appearances is a step down from Majel Barrett's role as number 1 in the original Star Trek pilot. But that doesn't mean Chapel doesn't have her charms. She helps save the day in an episode or two, looking at you, Return to Tomorrow. And again, like many of the women I've touched on in this series, I'd gladly hang out with her if she were real. Nursing is a highly valuable job, as we know now more than ever. But even in those episodes where she is helpful or relevant, it is rarely, if ever, her choice or her idea. She is arguably relevant, but not really an agent in her own right. Not to mention, barely an episode goes by where Chapel is not intimately connected with her romantic attraction to a man. This is most often her apparently doomed attraction to Spock, but in the episode where she's probably most present, What Are Little Girls Made Of?, it's the discovery of her MIA fiancé that brings her to center stage. Well, behind Kirk.
Overall, though their regular appearances mean these characters have a stronger impact than other female characters in the original series, their characterizations do still suffer from the same sexualizing and sidelining as any other women.
Like many of the others, they are cool people, and I'd say these two in particular are definitely good role models. The overall cultural impact of Uhura in particular really can't be ignored. She's a wonderful pop culture icon that's inspired a lot of people, and rightfully so. But these women are not given much to do, and stay very comfortably within feminine norms of the time. What they are given to do often hinges on men, relationships, and sexuality, if it is plot relevant. This certainly tracks with the cultural norms of the 1960s, and Star Trek is not unusual amongst its contemporaries. Trek might even be marginally better than a fair amount of media at the time, but the treatment of women and marginalized groups in the original series, and frankly Star Trek at large, is worth examining and analyzing given how important the franchise continues to be to so many.
As with all the women in the original series, this isn't about liking the characters or not, or passing judgments on them as hypothetical people. This is about how maybe these impactful and interesting women deserved better on a narrative level? My concern is not so much with the idea of these women, it's with oppressive societal structures and how they are reflected in this beloved series. Like Carol Marcus, both Uhura and Chapel appear in the more recent Star Trek films, though in drastically different ways. Chapel is only mentioned twice, once in Star Trek and once in Into Darkness.
Her name is shouted in Medbay in the first film, and Carol Marcus mentions her to Kirk in Into Darkness, telling him that she and Chapel are friends, and informing the audience that Chapel and Kirk once dated or hooked up, something that he apparently doesn't remember.
What a lovely way to honor a fairly central character played by the showrunner's wife. She doesn't even have an actress. So, Chapel's role in the alternate timeline is kinda lame. But Uhura is front and center, so let's talk about Uhura.
Zoe Saldana does a wonderful job as a modernized Uhura, and it's great fun to see her interact more with the rest of the cast and to see explicit mention made of how important and involved her role on the bridge is. She's a linguist with a massive amount of knowledge, training, and relevance on a starship, on top of being an entertaining character filled with confidence and personality. However, as is most blatantly obvious in the rebooting of the character Carol Marcus, J.J. Abrams and his team don't seem to have the highest regard, or at least the highest interest, in women in Star Trek. And though the characterization of Uhura is updated in some interesting ways, her place in the story is no better than any role played by her original counterpart. Like the women in the original series, this Uhura continues to be an accessory to male stories. Her most independent moments, like taking over communications on the bridge, serve mainly as plot contrivances. Most of the scenes where she's really featured just serve to add flavor to Kirk or Spock's character arcs, whether it's Kirk hitting on her or some element of her romantic relationship with Spock. So, as fun as she slips back into Karen Blair's criteria, where her appearances hinge on her relationships, and romantic ones at that, with men, and I think we can also comfortably say she is sexualized, given her gratuitous stripping scene in the 2009 film.
Overall, the story of the 2009 film doesn't really do her any favors, and without any appearances by Janice Rand or Christine Chapel, Uhura becomes the only woman in a central cast of men.
She does get a fair amount of screen time, but as the only core woman in 2009's Star Trek, her mediocre role in the narrative invites more scrutiny and leaves more to be desired, as there are no other representations of womankind in the story other than brief appearances by the maternal Amanda or the sexy Gayla, both of whom fit very traditional roles for women. These characterizations wouldn't be concerning in a vacuum. These are types of women that exist and absolutely deserve respect and representation. But when these are the only three representations of femininity in Star Trek, and none of them have really active roles in the story, the presentation of women comes out as flat at best. Uhura's situation remains fairly similar in Into Darkness, though, frankly, the mediocre writing of any other female characters in that film is whited out by the blinding lens flare that is how they butchered Carol Marcus. But I do want to note here that Uhura's comparative lack of narrative agency particularly bothers me given that the writers seem to be trying to make her the third member of a protagonist trio with Spock and Kirk, filling the space traditionally held by Leonard McCoy. This is most prevalent in Into Darkness, and though I will readily admit that Bones doesn't always have the most active role in Star Trek storylines, he is consistently a valuable voice in important conversations, offering a specific brand of advice and opinion that really adds depth to the story. I would argue that the alternate Uhura, again, however much fun I also think she is, isn't given that much weight. She is consistently either a convenient tool, bringing in her linguistic skills at key moments, though the action and decision-making are still generally handled by the men, or she's a love interest, spicing up scenes by arguing with Spock or similarly invoking or complicating their relationship. Her impact in Star Trek and Into Darkness is comparatively surface level, though, those are kind of surface level movies, but I'm not here to just rag on the reboot films. Star Trek Beyond, in 2016, did improve on this somewhat. With the cast broken apart into a variety of plot lines, Uhura is able to lead a story and come out of the background to hold some more narrative agency, getting closer to her potential as a character. The addition of the alien Jayla also offers a new and different presentation of femininity, as well as another central woman with relevant skills who isn't a bastardized rehashing of a way better character. This adds more variety of female characters, and as such makes it less important that either character be the best representation alone.
There are also no gratuitous scenes of women in their underwear, so that's a plus. Though all of the alternate original series films have their flaws, Star Trek Beyond certainly does the best by the female characters. It's a marked improvement over the previous two films. And though all women in Star Trek have their fans and their moments and their charms, I would also say that these recent films haven't necessarily been the best Star Trek has to offer in terms of representation of women. Though my favorite and most watched iteration of Star Trek is the original series, that's not to say I'm not familiar with or have any fondness for other parts of the canon. As mentioned in my Carol Marcus video, progress is not linear, but since the original series, women have become more and more of a part of Star Trek, of the stories and the narratives and blessedly work behind the scenes. Things have improved in fits and starts, though the treatment of women behind the scenes has often been iffy. However, I can most confidently say that the women in Star Trek Discovery are excellent. I'm not caught up on the series, but from what I have seen, Burnham and Tilly and frankly, the whole core cast are lovely.
They're really compelling and central characters with individual agency, and even if you're unhappy with any part of their characters or arcs, they have a luxury other women before them kinda didn't. They aren't the only woman on the show. Prior to Discovery, female characters, however great, and many of them are excellent in their own right, were generally limited to maybe a third of each core cast, and nearly all of them were comparatively secondary characters. Yes, I know Captain Janeway exists, and I'm happy for her, but there's only 3 other women on that cast, 2 of them don't even really overlap, and Seven of Nine's costuming is not a good sign, to say the least. And I'm not saying Voyager is bad, I'm certainly not qualified to make that judgment, but in terms of representation, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Discovery is better. Not only are the women in Discovery greater in number, getting closer to half the cast, they are more central. Michael is, I think, a really interesting protagonist, and Tilly is an invaluable, engaging facet of that core cast. Throw in practical and sharp costume design and a really great amount of diversity, and if nothing else, I really appreciate the characters Discovery crafted for its main cast and the comparative diversity behind the scenes.
If I ever catch up on Star Trek Discovery, I'll probably make a more detailed video about all this, but I gotta be honest, it's kind of hard to get a hold of and not super high on my priority list, so don't hold your breath on that one. Unless, you want to support me on Patreon so I can pay for Paramount Plus. Thanks for tuning in for more analysis of female characters in the original series. I really appreciate it. I could clearly talk about this for way too long, but that's it for this video. I didn't cover everything suggested to me, so I hope to make another video like this sometime in the future.
If you want to see more videos like this about Star Trek or media analysis or whatever, let me know in the comments. Likes, comments, and subscribers are all really appreciated, and I'm always open to video topic suggestions. If you're feeling real generous, consider supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi, but most of all, I hope you'll tune in to my next video, where I'll be talking about everyone's favorite first officer, Mr. Spock. Have a good one, and I hope to see you soon.